Hi, if you're catching this on my YouTube channel rather than as a podcast, you can see that I'm outside in another park. I'm testing out a different park for my coffee and working and so on. Um, just listened to a podcast where somebody got the domain name bad.coffee and it redirects somewhere that I won't mention. Anyway, coffee, computer, park, outside. The ancient Stoics talked a lot about needing to get outside. They meant out into nature to broaden your perspective and to and to just enjoy things, refresh yourself mentally and physically. But they also meant get outside of yourself intellectually, get outside of your prejudices, get outside of your preconceived notions. It's easy for us to make assumptions and then build a whole philosophy or theology or life around that and be just totally wrong. Hey, this is Gary. This is Gary on manufacturing, and actually, whereas one of my hobbies is philosophy, we're not going down that path today. We're going down the path of uh, things like productivity and in manufacturing and that sort of thing. And this podcast, as always, is brought to you with support from Inductive Automation. Discover a whole new view with Ignition 8 by Inductive Automation. It's packed with features for the modern control system like unlimited licensing, high-powered tags, and a mobile-first, flexible design environment for all devices. Ignition 8 supports enterprises of any size. See all Ignition has to offer at inductiveautomation.com. And while you're at inductiveautomation.com, check out the upcoming Ignition Community Conference that will be held virtually in September. And last year they had it virtually because nobody was traveling, and it was very informative. Learned a lot. So I had an interesting interview last week, and it was set up with the idea that here is somebody that could talk about how to overcome all the negativity toward lean manufacturing. I said, what negativity? You know, lean is a proven approach or method or whatever you want to call it. It's actually a way of life for improving manufacturing. And so I interviewed a woman by the name of Mary Donnellan, who's executive director of manufacturing at a company called KMC Systems. And this company manufactures, it designs, builds, sometimes builds to print, sometimes builds to custom design, medical diagnostic devices. They recently got into COVID device diagnostics. Interestingly enough, so we were building 11 a month and all of a sudden had to go to 40 a month and really spit out more parts. So anyway, we talked about lean. She's a lean manufacturing guru. And I said, what did you have to overcome? And she said, well, the main thing was, management brought me in, they hired me, and I'm going to restructure manufacturing. What's the first thing all the people think? Well, I guess I've been there, done that. The first thing everybody thinks is, you're going to get rid of all the jobs. I used to jokingly tell my kids I sold automation and I put people out of work, which was not true, but it was the kind of joke that I'm prone toward, which is why nobody understands my jokes. But anyway, she came in and she began doing the typical, lean manufacturing things. We organize our workspaces. We look at things and we ask 5 whys, and we 5 whys success and all that sort of stuff. Stand-up meetings and getting cross-cultural teams together to look at problems and solve problems, and it was working. She it was doing rather well, and they were able to do a number of things. First off, she was able to prove that I'm not replacing all the jobs. As a matter of fact, now instead of having to work mandatory overtime and never seeing your families, we can work a more normal week and get the product, the production out. And the other thing was, as they took on more work, then these people who had learned skills in manufacturing could go from the production line they were on to help start new production lines and get a sense of accomplishment and learning and all those good things that come out. And I said, of course this should happen, because what's the first principle of lean? Respect for people. And I've worked in a lot of different organizations, and was always amazed at the number of, especially management people or supervisory people, but other people just in the production line too, who had no respect for other people. They were always somebody they could look down on. No matter where you were in life, you could look down on somebody and say, they're lazy, they don't work, they do whatever, they belong to this social group or this social class or this ethnic group or whatever it might be. Everybody's got these preconceived notions and prejudices. And the first thing you have to do if you're instituting something good like lean is, hey, everybody has a brain, and we didn't just hire a pair of hands to put a bolt in a hole on the production line. We hired a whole person with a brain who can help us solve problems. And once again, I've worked in several manufacturing places where that was the case, where the ingenuity of the production line worker saved our bacon, so to speak. And I was thinking about productivity because a friend of mine, John Dyke, D-Y-C-K, you may have seen on LinkedIn or someplace, is now the CEO of CESMI, C-E-S-M-I-I, which is the Smart Manufacturing Institute. It's a project of the U.S. federal government. Put a thing on LinkedIn, a chart, and it was a curve, and what it showed in the curve was that productivity, manufacturing, industrial productivity, grew from like 1900 to 1980 at a tremendous pace, and then after 1980, for the ensuing 40 years, it pretty much, productivity growth pretty much leveled up. And he offered a challenge like, why is this and what are we going to do about it? And so I took that to heart. It's like, well, is that true? I thought, well, productivity as defined in that graph was amount of production divided by number of hours. So my first thought is, well, what are the actual things that go into output, and what are the actual hours that go into this hours part of the denominator of this equation, so to speak. And I never really got a good answer exactly, but we do know that output is related to a number of things. For one thing, you're only going to produce, hopefully, what you can sell. You shouldn't be just building to stock and building to stock and building up stock. I worked in a company that way one time, and we went out of business. If nobody's buying. So partly we're a function of sales, partly we're a function of the constraints of our production line, our facility, sometimes money, sometimes we can't afford to grow anymore, and so on. So there are constraints that put a cap on output, that output just can't keep growing on to infinity. And the other thing is labor hours, and we can reduce labor hours and reduce labor hours, but I think there is some limit below which you can't go. There was an old cartoon, an old joke about there was a whole factory spitting out parts in the end, and it had like one employee and a dog. And the employee's job was to turn on the switch at the beginning and then let it run all day. The dog's job was to keep the employee from doing anything else. And of course that's ridiculous, because that's not going to happen. Parts have to come in, parts have to go out, somebody has to bring them in, somebody has to take them out, it has to be delivered. No machine works in perpetuity, and it needs some kind of maintenance and upkeep and so on. So there have to be people there. There have to be there has to be some minimum level of people in a factory to get the output. So I'm thinking that growth in productivity, in a certain area has to reach some sort of limit. Don't know what it is, but and I would have to say that probably a huge percentage of enterprises, not only in America but everywhere else, um, can achieve some additional productivity. There's no doubt about it. But I was wondering if part of the productivity thing, so I don't know what all goes into the hours worked because of the changing roles that we have of people who actually work in manufacturing. And it's pretty much not just, um, people on a production line. And there's a whole mix of things. We brought in a lot of software people who may not be IT people, and whether or not they're counted, I don't know because they would work in the manufacturing enterprise. But at some point in time, we've got knowledge workers that are sitting at a computer. Part of the day, they're doing data analysis and they're doing other kinds of things and decision making and so on. And whether or not they're counted in the official statistic that John had quoted doesn't really matter. We have them, and are they productive? Well, Cal Newport, known for a book called Deep Work, has just released a new book, and it's called the A World Without Email. And all of us who are knowledge workers know the productivity drag of email. Some of us use email as our to-do list. If we could just go through all the emails and do whatever we've been requested by whoever happens to send us stuff, we go home at the end of the day, we feel like we've done something even though we haven't really. And so he's got a whole book on that, and his book essentially is on workflow. It's not necessarily doing away with all email. There is a reason to have messages going in and out and so on, but we certainly do abuse email. I recommend highly getting Cal Newport's World Without Email and checking out, and he's talking about workflow, and workflow goes into productivity. As we improve our workflow and enhance our workflow, we emphasize the important things we should be doing rather than the urgent things we are doing. And that led me to asking, has software actually increased our productivity? I've been involved in manufacturing software since 1978, and it's been a continuing interest ever since. So I happen to be interviewing Keith Higgins, relatively new with Rockwell Automation. He's the vice president of digital transformation. His portfolio is software such as the MES software, analytics software, and that sort of thing. And I said, so Keith, what, if I were to ask, which I am, how has software, the things in your portfolio, improve productivity in manufacturing? And he says, well, we look at it three ways. One, assets. We have products like condition monitoring and predictive analytics and so on to help keep assets up and running. So that's asset productivity. Production line utilization, that's utilizing all these assets that are up and running because we've made them productive. And then he said humans, and he pointed to a recent acquisition by Rockwell of a company called Fiix, F-I-I-X, and it's a CMMS, computerized maintenance management system is the old term, CMMS company, which integrating with everything else, which I'm sure they will do, helps coordinate the maintenance people with the production people and so on, and get things done, once again enhancing different kinds of productivity. But then I was thinking, I had another interview where I was sitting in with a group of analysts and writers on a Qualcomm, the chip company. They had a press conference, and they were releasing a new 5G, the new cellular technology, a new 5G chipset. And while they were talking about all the benefits and everything in this chipset and so on, they mentioned that they have two target markets geographically right now. One is Europe, and the other is China. So the question I had was, why not America? And I think when I start looking at that, and I start looking at open source, and I start looking at standards, both of which are technologies and things that improve productivity. You can get things done faster if you don't have to reinvent the wheel and just adopt standards that have already been agreed on, for example. And America seems to lag in all those. I don't find as many Americans on standards committees. I don't find as many Americans adopting some of the standards, or American companies. Um, in some of the software I don't see. I haven't talked to anybody for at least a couple of years, but MES, the MESA organization, offers a lot of MES training, and MOM, the ISA 95 acronym. And what they tell me is they try to sign up a class in America, and they're lucky to get enough to even have the class. In Europe, they'll fill a class, and in Asia, they have to add classes. There's that kind of interest in learning about applying these new technologies. And so to me, there's a challenge to Americans, and then I say, is it just because we have too many old engineers? But I'm an old guy, and I'm up on that. I don't think I'm that different from the world. But maybe that's it. Maybe it's just sloppy management. Maybe management has just been trying to get by, and they've undervalued that black box, the poor executive VP who's in charge of manufacturing, who doesn't get a seat at the real table or something. I don't know. Maybe we just have backward management over here. Whatever it is, I have a challenge, and that's to pick up the pace on this stuff and get us back in this manufacturing game here in America, where we invented so much of all the good things of manufacturing. Anyway, this is Gary. A few thoughts. You can feel free to send me feedback. It's Gary at themanufacturingconnection.com. Check out my blog at themanufacturingconnection.com. And eventually you're going to see something, a new platform coming. I have been transferring to an email service called Hey, Hey. So you can always write to me at garyminchell@hey.com. But there's a thing called world@hey.com. And it's like kind of like a mini blogging platform and a newsletter platform. And I'm going to be moving some stuff over to that, although the blog will still exist. But I've been doing an occasional newsletter, and that's going to move to that World Hey platform. So anyway, hey, the pandemic seems to be winding down. Hopefully you're all vaccinated and ready to get out and meet people and get back into the swing of things. With any luck, maybe I'll see you at Nuremberg in November at the SPS show. You can always hope. Or I'll see you around somewhere. Gary Minchell on manufacturing. Thanks for listening. And a reminder, this podcast is brought with support of Inductive Automation. Discover a whole new view with Ignition 8 by Inductive Automation, packed with features for the modern control system like unlimited licensing, high-powered tags, and a mobile-first flexible design environment for all devices. Ignition 8 supports enterprises of any size. Check them out at inductiveautomation.com. And while you're there, check out the Ignition Community Conference, which will be coming up in September, virtually this year, and then hopefully we're back on track for virtual plus in-person meeting in the future. Stay safe, have fun, see you later.